Picture this. Somewhere in Disney's vast archives sits a piece of animation that will never see the light of day. Not because it's poorly made, not because it doesn't fit the story, but because it crosses a line that even Disney wouldn't dare approach. This isn't about a quick gag that didn't land, or a song that got cut for time. This is about a scene so intense, so raw in its depiction of nature's reality, that it was deemed too disturbing for any audience Disney wanted to reach. The Lion King changed everything when it roared into theaters in 1994. Here was Disney tackling the African savanna with unprecedented scope and ambition. But here's what most people don't realize. For every minute of footage that made it to screens, countless others were left on the cutting room floor. Some were removed for pacing, others for story reasons. But one particular sequence was removed for a much more unsettling reason. Disney has always walked a careful tightrope. On one side lies the magical sanitized world that built their empire. A place where animals sing, where good always triumphs, where even the scariest moments resolve into heartwarming lessons. On the other side lurks the unforgiving reality of the natural world they're trying to portray. The Lion King pushed closer to that reality than any Disney film before it. But there were still boundaries the studio refused to cross. What makes this particular lost scene so fascinating isn't just what it contained, but what it reveals about Disney's internal struggles during production. Animators and story artists found themselves grappling with an impossible question. How do you tell an authentic story about lions while maintaining the Disney brand? The circle of life philosophy sounds beautiful in song, but the actual mechanics of that circle involve elements that would send children running from theaters. Consider what The Lion King already showed audiences. We witnessed a father's tragic end, saw characters fleeing in terror, watched as drought and destruction consumed the Pride Lands. The film wasn't afraid to explore themes of loss, responsibility, and the harsh realities of leadership. Yet somewhere in the story development process, Disney's creative team crafted something that went too far, even by these standards. The clues to this censored content lie scattered throughout the film's production history. Animators have hinted at scenes that made test audiences uncomfortable. Voice actors have mentioned recording sessions for sequences that mysteriously vanished from the final cut. Story supervisors have alluded to narrative elements that were deemed too intense for our target demographic. But what could possibly be too intense for a film that already dealt with exile, starvation, and family trauma? What aspect of lion behavior or savanna life crossed the line from acceptable darkness into forbidden territory? The answer lies in understanding not just what Disney chose to show, but what they deliberately chose to hide. This isn't speculation about deleted scenes that fans imagine might exist. Multiple sources from the production have confirmed that content was created, reviewed, and ultimately locked away. The decision to remove it wasn't made lightly. It involved heated discussions between directors, producers, and studio executives. It forced Disney to confront fundamental questions about their identity as storytellers and their responsibility to audiences. The most intriguing aspect is that this scene apparently wasn't gratuitously violent or shocking for shock's sake. According to those familiar with it, the sequence was actually quite beautiful from an artistic standpoint. The animation was stunning, the storytelling was compelling, but it depicted natural behavior with such unflinching accuracy that it fundamentally changed the tone of everything around it. What we're dealing with here isn't just a curiosity for animation fans or Disney historians. This banned scene represents a pivotal moment in Disney's evolution, a line in the sand that defined what the studio would and wouldn't show. It's a window into the creative tensions that exist when artistic vision meets commercial reality, when the desire to tell authentic stories collides with the need to maintain broad appeal. The question that haunts this mystery isn't just what the scene contained, but whether Disney made the right choice in removing it. Did they protect their audience from something genuinely traumatic? Or did they rob them of a more honest, more meaningful understanding of the natural world? The answer to that question reveals as much about us, as viewers, as it does about Disney, as storytellers. To understand why a single scene could be deemed too dangerous for The Lion King, we need to examine Disney's complex relationship with content censorship. This isn't a company that stumbled into family-friendly entertainment by accident. It's the result of decades of careful calculation, public backlash, and hard-learned lessons about what audiences will accept. Disney's early years tell a very different story than the sanitized version most people know today. Walt Disney's original vision was far more experimental, more willing to push boundaries and explore darker themes. The 1940 masterpiece Fantasia included sequences that were genuinely unsettling. Demons rising from volcanic depths, skeletal figures dancing in moonlight, forces of nature portrayed as genuinely destructive rather than merely mischievous. But even then, Disney learned painful lessons about audience expectations. The original version of Pinocchio included scenes of children being physically transformed in ways that traumatized test audiences. Early Mickey Mouse cartoons featured the character in situations that would be considered inappropriate today, using animals as musical instruments, engaging in behavior that bordered on cruel rather than playful. The turning point came in the 1950s when Disney shifted toward television and began to understand their brand as something larger than individual films. They realized they weren't just making movies. They were creating a universe that parents needed to trust implicitly. This meant every frame of every film had to pass an invisible test. Would a parent feel comfortable letting their child watch this unsupervised? This paranoia about content wasn't unfounded. Disney had experienced firsthand how quickly public opinion could turn against them. Religious groups had protested elements in early films. Parent organizations had published lists of problematic Disney content. The studio learned that their reputation for wholesomeness was both their greatest asset and their most fragile possession. By the time The Lion King entered production in the early 1990s, Disney had developed an elaborate system for content review. Every scene went through multiple rounds of analysis, not just for story effectiveness, but for potential audience reaction. Focus groups weren't just asked whether they enjoyed something, they were specifically questioned about whether any moment made them uncomfortable, whether they would recommend the film to others, whether they felt the content was appropriate for children. But The Lion King presented unique challenges that Disney's usual protocols weren't designed to handle. Previous Disney films had dealt with fantasy worlds where the rules of reality could be bent to serve the story. Even films featuring animals, like Bambi or The Jungle Book, took place in stylized environments where predator-prey relationships could be softened or avoided entirely. The Lion King was different. The film's entire marketing strategy was built around authenticity. The unprecedented research trips to Africa, the consultation with wildlife experts, the revolutionary animation techniques that brought realistic animal movement to the screen. Disney was promising audiences the most accurate portrayal of African wildlife ever attempted in animation. This created an impossible contradiction. How do you deliver authentic wildlife behavior while maintaining Disney's family-friendly standards? Real lions don't sing their way through conflicts. Real hyenas aren't comic relief, bumbling through failed schemes. Real survival in the savannah involves elements that would horrify Disney's target demographic. The studio's solution was carefully calibrated compromise. They would show enough reality to maintain their claims of authenticity, but they would sanitize the most disturbing elements. Predators would be threatening, but never truly predatory. Conflict would be dramatic, but never genuinely violent. Character development would acknowledge harsh realities without actually depicting them. But somewhere in this delicate balancing act, Disney's creative team produced something that went too far. Multiple production sources have confirmed that at least one sequence was created that depicted lion behavior with such uncompromising accuracy that it couldn't be reconciled with Disney's brand requirements. The decision to remove this content wasn't made by a single executive or director. It involved extensive discussions between creative teams, marketing departments, and studio leadership. The scene was reportedly shown to multiple test audiences, and the reaction was consistent. While adults could appreciate the artistic achievement and narrative power, the content was deemed inappropriate for the broad family audience Disney needed to reach. What makes this censorship particularly significant is that it wasn't about protecting children from gratuitous violence or inappropriate content. According to those familiar with the removed material, it was about protecting them from reality itself, from an unvarnished view of natural behavior that would fundamentally change how they understood the animal kingdom. This raises uncomfortable questions about Disney's role as cultural storyteller. When the studio sanitizes nature to make it palatable, what lessons are children actually learning? When survival becomes adventure and predation becomes comedy, are we preparing young audiences to understand the real world, or are we creating harmful misconceptions about how nature actually functions? The banned Lion King scene represents the furthest point Disney was willing to go toward authentic wildlife portrayal before pulling back to safer ground. It's a line that reveals not just the studio's priorities, but our collective comfort level with natural truth. Here's the fundamental problem Disney faced with The Lion King. Nature doesn't care about your comfort level. The African savanna operates on principles that would make most Disney executives break into cold sweats. Every day in the wild involves life and demise situations that unfold with a brutality that no amount of musical numbers can soften. Consider what real lions actually do for survival. A pride doesn't sing about the circle of life. They live it in ways that would traumatize audiences expecting Disney magic. Male lions routinely eliminate cubs that aren't their own offspring. Lionesses coordinate hunting strategies that involve prolonged chases, ending in ways that nature documentaries can barely show during prime time. The hierarchy within a pride is maintained through displays of dominance that make Scar's power grab look like a polite disagreement. Disney's genius has always been in transformation, taking these harsh realities and reshaping them into something palatable. But The Lion King pushed this transformation further than ever before. Previous Disney animal films had the luxury of fantasy settings, where natural behavior could be completely reimagined. Bambi dealt with forest creatures that could be portrayed as gentle and innocent. The Jungle Book featured animals in a mythical setting where predators and prey could coexist through personality and song. The Lion King couldn't hide behind fantasy. The film's entire marketing campaign emphasized authenticity. The research, the realistic animation, the accurate portrayal of African wildlife. Disney was essentially promising audiences a nature documentary with Disney storytelling. But real nature documentaries include footage that would earn R ratings if it appeared in theatrical films. Other animation studios have tried to tackle this same challenge with varying degrees of success. Don Bluth's approach in films like The Land Before Time was to acknowledge natural dangers while keeping the actual violence off-screen. DreamWorks later took a different approach with films like Madagascar, using comedy to deflect from predator-prey realities entirely. But none of these studios had Disney's specific burden: the expectation that their content would be suitable for unsupervised viewing by children of all ages. The psychological impact of realistic animal behavior on young viewers is more complex than simple trauma avoidance. Child development experts have noted that children who grow up with sanitized versions of nature often struggle to understand environmental realities later in life. When predators are always villains and prey animals are always innocent victims, children develop skewed perceptions of ecological balance. But there's a darker side to this equation. Research has shown that children exposed to realistic predator behavior, even in controlled educational contexts, can develop lasting anxiety about the natural world. The very authenticity that makes for compelling storytelling can create phobias and misconceptions that persist into adulthood. Disney found themselves walking an impossible tightrope. Too much sanitization, and they'd be accused of misleading children about natural realities. Too much authenticity, and they'd traumatize their core audience. The Lion King, as released, represents Disney's attempt to find the perfect balance, realistic enough to feel authentic, sanitized enough to remain family-friendly. Look at what the film actually chose to show versus what it carefully avoided. We see the aftermath of the wildebeest stampede, but not the actual moment of impact. We witness the Pride Lands dying under Scar's rule, but we don't see the specific mechanisms of starvation and ecosystem collapse. We understand that hyenas are dangerous, but their actual hunting techniques remain safely off-screen. Even the film's most intense moments are carefully choreographed to suggest rather than depict. The fight between Simba and Scar takes place during a dramatic rainstorm with strategic lighting that obscures the most violent elements. When Scar meets his end, it happens off-screen with only shadows and sound effects to suggest what's occurring. This careful balance worked brilliantly for Disney's commercial purposes, but it created a version of nature that exists nowhere in the real world. The Lion King's Pride Lands are a fantasy savanna where the harshest realities of survival are either hidden, sanitized, or transformed into teachable moments about responsibility and growth. The band scene apparently crossed the line from suggesting reality to depicting it. According to production insiders, this wasn't content that was violent for the sake of being shocking. It was authentic animal behavior portrayed with such uncompromising accuracy that it fundamentally changed the viewing experience. Think about what that means. Disney's animators, working with wildlife consultants and reference footage, created something so realistic that it couldn't coexist with the rest of the film's carefully constructed fantasy. It was apparently a moment where the authentic African savanna broke through Disney's protective barriers and reminded audiences what the circle of life actually involves. This raises fascinating questions about the nature of storytelling itself. When we sanitize reality to make it digestible, are we creating meaningful art or comfortable lies? When children watch The Lion King and learn about the African savanna, what version of nature are they actually understanding? The answer might be more disturbing than Disney's removed scene itself. By creating a version of nature that feels real but operates on fantasy principles, Disney may have done something more manipulative than showing authentic wildlife behavior. They created a false paradise that exists only in animation, a world where natural selection happens through character growth rather than survival of the fittest. Now we reach the heart of the mystery. What exactly did Disney create that was deemed too authentic for audiences? To understand this, we need to examine the specific elements of lion behavior that The Lion King carefully avoided, and imagine what would happen if Disney's legendary animation skills were applied to depicting these realities without their usual protective filters. The most likely candidate for this banned content involves the fundamental mechanism that drives pride dynamics: infanticide. In real lion societies, when a new male takes over a pride, his first act is typically the elimination of all cubs sired by the previous leader. This isn't cruelty, it's evolutionary strategy. By removing offspring that don't carry his genes, the new leader ensures that the pride's resources go toward raising his own future cubs. Consider how this behavior would translate to The Lion King's storyline. When Scar assumes control of the Pride Lands, authentic lion behavior would dictate a very specific and disturbing sequence of events. The film hints at this reality. We see that the Pride has no cubs during Scar's reign, and Simba appears to be the sole surviving offspring from Mufasa's time. But Disney carefully avoids explaining why this demographic shift occurred. Animation insiders have suggested that the banned scene depicted this transition with scientific accuracy. Imagine Disney's world-class animators bringing their full technical mastery to a sequence showing realistic lion territorial behavior. The scene wouldn't need to be gratuitously graphic. Disney's artists could convey the emotional weight and biological reality through their sophisticated understanding of character animation and storytelling. The horror of such a scene wouldn't come from explicit imagery, but from the unflinching portrayal of natural selection in action. Disney's strength has always been in making audiences emotionally invested in characters, then using that investment to deliver powerful storytelling moments. A scene showing authentic pride takeover behavior would leverage that same emotional manipulation, but toward an end that would leave audiences fundamentally disturbed rather than uplifted. Voice actor testimonies provide another clue to this mystery. Several performers from The Lion King have mentioned recording sessions for sequences that didn't appear in the final film. Jeremy Irons, who voiced Scar, has alluded to delivering lines that explored his character's motivations in much darker territory. James Earl Jones reportedly recorded material that dealt with Mufasa's legacy in ways that were deemed too complex for the target audience. The technical challenges of animating realistic predator behavior would have pushed Disney's artists into unprecedented territory. The studio's animators had spent months studying real lions, learning their movement patterns, understanding their social dynamics. When applied to authentic hunting or territorial behavior, this research would have enabled animation that was uncomfortably convincing. Consider the difference between what Disney showed with the hyenas versus what they could have shown. The hyena sequences in The Lion King push boundaries by portraying these animals as genuinely threatening, but they remain safely within cartoon villain territory. They're scary, but they're scary in the way that Disney villains are traditionally scary. Dramatic, theatrical, ultimately defeatable through courage and cleverness. Real hyena behavior involves pack-hunting strategies that would be genuinely disturbing to witness, even in animation. These animals are incredibly intelligent, using sophisticated coordination to take down prey much larger than themselves. The process involves elements that would make Scar's scheming look like child's play in comparison. The banned scene apparently showed predator behavior with such technical precision that it ceased to be entertainment and became something closer to educational documentary footage, except with Disney's emotional storytelling techniques amplifying the psychological impact. Animation historians have noted that Disney's artists during this period were pushing the boundaries of what was possible with traditional animation. The Lion King represented the peak of the studio's technical capabilities before the shift to computer animation. The artists had the tools and skills to create virtually anything they could imagine. And that unlimited capability apparently led them into territory that the studio couldn't commercially support. The decision to remove this content wasn't made lightly. Multiple sources confirmed that the scene was fully animated, voiced, and scored before being pulled from the final cut. This wasn't rough storyboard material that was rejected during early development. It was completed animation that someone high up in Disney's hierarchy decided could never be shown to audiences. What makes this particularly fascinating is that the scene apparently worked perfectly from a storytelling perspective. It wasn't removed because it didn't fit the narrative or because it was poorly executed. According to those familiar with it, the sequence was artistically successful. It just depicted natural behavior with such uncompromising accuracy that it fundamentally changed the tone of everything around it. The revelation that haunts this mystery is simple. Disney created something that was too real for their own universe. They applied their legendary storytelling skills to authentic animal behavior and discovered that reality, no matter how beautifully presented, has sharp edges that can cut through even the most carefully constructed fantasy. This banned scene represents the furthest point Disney was willing to go toward authentic nature portrayal before recognizing that some truths are incompatible with the magic they're trying to create. It's the moment when Disney's artists looked into the real circle of life and decided that audiences weren't ready for what they found there. The story of Disney's banned Lion King scene isn't really about a single piece of lost animation. It's about a fundamental choice that continues to shape how we tell stories about the natural world, how we educate children about reality, and what we lose when we prioritize comfort over truth. By removing this authentic content, Disney made a decision that reverberates far beyond their own films. They established a precedent that nature must be palatable, that wildlife stories must serve our emotional needs rather than reflecting biological realities. This choice has influenced decades of subsequent films, documentaries, and educational content, creating a cultural blind spot that affects how entire generations understand the natural world. Consider the lasting impact of The Lion King's sanitized approach. Children who grew up with this film learned that nature operates according to moral principles, that good animals are herbivores, that predators are villains, that ecosystems can be restored through personal growth and redemption. These lessons feel beautiful and inspiring, but they create fundamental misconceptions about how environmental systems actually function. Modern conservation efforts struggle against these Disney-created expectations. When children grow up believing that nature should be harmonious and that all animals can coexist peacefully, they're unprepared for the complex realities of wildlife management, habitat preservation, and species protection. The cute anthropomorphized animals of Disney films bear little resemblance to the wild creatures that actually need our protection. But Disney's choice also reflects a broader cultural anxiety about childhood innocence. The decision to remove authentic content from The Lion King reveals our collective discomfort with allowing children to confront difficult truths, even in controlled, educational contexts. We've created a society that prioritizes emotional safety over intellectual honesty, comfort over understanding. This protection comes with hidden costs. Research in child psychology suggests that children who are gradually exposed to manageable challenges and difficult concepts develop better emotional resilience than those who are shielded from all potentially disturbing content. By removing the banned scene, Disney may have protected children from temporary discomfort, while leaving them more vulnerable to future emotional challenges. The irony is that children are often more capable of processing difficult realities than adults give them credit for. Kids understand that nature involves predators and prey. They grasp that survival requires difficult choices. What they struggle with isn't the existence of these realities, but the dishonest way adults often present them. Disney's modern approach to difficult topics shows how the studio continues to grapple with these same tensions. Films like Moana and Encanto tackle complex cultural and psychological themes, but they do so within carefully constructed frameworks that ensure emotional safety for audiences. Even when dealing with trauma, loss, or cultural conflict, modern Disney maintains the same protective barriers that led to The Lion King's censorship. The banned scene represents a road not taken, a glimpse of what Disney storytelling might look like if the studio prioritized authenticity over palatability. Would children be traumatized by more realistic nature content, or would they develop deeper, more nuanced understanding of the world around them? Would Disney's cultural influence be more positive if their stories reflected biological realities rather than moral fantasies? These questions become more urgent as environmental challenges intensify. Climate change, habitat destruction, and species extinction require solutions based on scientific understanding rather than emotional wishful thinking. When popular culture consistently presents nature as a Disney-style paradise, where all problems can be solved through good intentions, we undermine the foundation for effective environmental action. The cultural impact extends beyond environmental issues. Disney's sanitized nature narratives contribute to broader patterns of reality avoidance that affect how we approach difficult topics across society. When we consistently choose comfort over truth in children's entertainment, we model an approach to problem-solving that prioritizes feeling good over understanding accurately. Yet, there's another side to this argument. Disney's primary responsibility may not be education, but entertainment. The studio's job might be to create magical experiences that inspire wonder and joy, not to serve as a substitute for science education. Perhaps the mistake isn't in Disney's choices, but in expecting animated films to bear the weight of authentic education about complex topics. The banned Lion King scene forces us to confront fundamental questions about the purpose of storytelling. Should children's entertainment reflect reality, or should it create aspirational visions of how we wish the world worked? Should popular culture educate audiences about difficult truths, or should it provide refuge from those same truths? The answer may be that we need both approaches: stories that comfort and stories that challenge, entertainment that inspires, and education that informs. The problem arises when one approach dominates so completely that audiences lose access to alternative perspectives. Disney's choice to remove authentic content from The Lion King wasn't necessarily wrong, but it was revealing. It showed us what the studio values, what our culture accepts, and what we're willing to sacrifice for the sake of emotional comfort. The banned scene exists in Disney's archives as a reminder of the path not taken, the story not told, the truth not shared. The most haunting aspect of this mystery isn't what the scene contained, but what its removal suggests about our relationship with reality itself. In creating a version of nature that feels authentic but operates on fantasy principles, Disney didn't just make an animated film. They created a cultural artifact that continues to shape how we understand our place in the natural world. Perhaps the real question isn't whether Disney made the right choice in banning this scene, but whether we're making the right choice in accepting sanitized versions of reality as substitutes for authentic understanding. The Lion King's missing footage represents more than lost animation. It's a symbol of the truths we're willing to sacrifice for the sake of comfort, and the price we pay when protection becomes a barrier to genuine knowledge. The scene remains locked away, but its absence speaks louder than its presence ever could. It reminds us that somewhere between fantasy and reality lies a story we're not quite ready to tell. And maybe that says more about us than it does about Disney.